Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing you another really awesome guest involved in science and technology and healthcare, creating a better tomorrow for many people out there. Today on the show, we have the honor of being joined by Wade Demmer, who is Vice President of Research and Development at Medtronic. His team is responsible for the development of new generations of pacemakers, and with extensive expertise in medical technology and innovation, his team leads the company's R&D efforts to develop cutting-edge healthcare solutions. He's dedicated to advancing medical advancements that ultimately improve patient outcomes, transform healthcare delivery. Wade began his career actually at Intel, where he gained valuable experience in tech development engineering, and then building on that technical experience, transitioned into the medtech, med device industry, bringing this strong innovation-driven mindset to how can be applied to healthcare solutions. And Wade is really well known for his extremely pioneering work on pacemakers, where he's contributed to the design and development of advanced cardiac pacing technologies, including the Micra, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. And his focus is, it has been involved in improving reliability, longevity, patient comfort of various pacemaker technologies, specifically impacting the field of cardiac care. Wade did his undergraduate degree with the Bachelor of Engineering from Iowa State University, also in computer engineering, moved on to University of Minnesota Carlson School of Management to his MBA. And we're honored to have him with us. A lot to get into. Wade Demmer, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Oh, thank you. This should be a lot of fun. This is a technology and futurism conversation, and I think it's always important to remember I'm an engineer. I'm not a doctor. There's no recommendations in this talk. Every patient's situation is unique, and you absolutely need to make sure you're talking to your physician. So please don't interpret any of this as medical advice. It's just a great conversation about technology in the future.
Looking forward to it. There's a theme we haven't. We've had a lot of great Medtronic guests on the show, but we have not touched on pacemakers yet. So I'm excited to go in this direction. Before we go there, though, I would love to, as we typically do, hand things over to you for a little bit, just to further introduce yourself. We'd love to hear a little bit more about your background, what got you into engineering, into computer science, and ultimately, sort of the situation you're sitting there in Intel. You're starting your career in tech, and all of a sudden, something drags you into med tech, and would love to hear that background story as well.
Yeah. I always, when I mentor students, I always remind them that careers are much longer than degrees. You're in college for around 4 years, you're in the workforce for around 40. So don't be surprised if you don't end up where you think you're going to. As a kid, I was a sort of a technology kid. I played a lot of video games. If your audience is of a certain age, they might remember video games like Metroid and Legend of Zelda, which have had great comebacks here in this century as well. I noticed weird things like the maximum number of missiles in Metroid was 255, and the maximum number of rupees in Zelda was 255. And you start seeing these things, and you're like, what's so magical about that number? Why did Nintendo decide on that? And of course, later in life, that's a nice round number from a binary math perspective. But these are the things that I noticed in video games, and back then you'd have to do a lot of work to even be able to play Doom via the modem with your neighbor. So you started learning a lot of computer stuff in order just to have fun. And so I ended up going into computer engineering, and I thought that was going to be, everything was going to have a computer in it. Computer engineering was going to be a really safe and good place to contribute to society. So I was doing my undergrad at Iowa State, go Cyclones, and got an internship at Intel, which was like, wow, I've made it, right? Intel wants me. I'm going to make Pentiums. And it was a great experience. I would have been very happy working at Intel. I don't in any way, shape, or form. There's a sliding door version of me who's still there and very happy. And I worked with them twice as an intern. But while I was in college, back in classes between internships, a group that made pacemakers came and talked to us, and they said, we need people to write the computer programs that the pacemaker runs. And I mean, I'd heard the word pacemaker before, but I wasn't like in biomed. I never thought about going into the device industry. It wasn't until that point where I realized, wait a minute, computer engineering isn't just making computers, it's anything with a computer. And that was a really interesting thing to hear about, that they wanted people to come and write code for these implantable devices. And around the same time, my grandma had gotten a pacemaker. And so you have this convergence, and it just feels like, something's knocking on your door and saying, look over here. And so I kind of did a quick pivot and looked up every company that made medical devices that was going to come interview at Iowa State, and got this interview with Medtronic, and it really changed. It really changed things, and what happened is I got the job at Medtronic. I started writing code for the pacemakers. I was learning all this biology from these super experts that are here, that, biology PhDs, biomed PhDs, all these people who work at a big company. And, I was really, really happy to be doing this work, paying back the world, paying back the industry for helping my grandma. And of course, the way fate would have it, when grandma's first pacemaker, ran out of battery and she had to get a second pacemaker, she ended up getting one that I had actually written code on. Nice. And so code that I wrote was now running in my own grandmother. And boy, if there's ever anything that really just hooks you into an industry, you think you're paying them back, and it turns out the people you're helping might be your own family. So, I mean, the industry's just been incredibly rewarding. And so many people here have stories like that, where it's just really personal. There's a personal connection to the stuff that we make. And so it's not just a job, right? It's a job where you're helping countless people, including people who are really important to you.
It's an awesome story, and I just I so appreciate the background here. And again, that it wasn't just about it's your passion, but also very personal to you. So I mean, that's awesome. It's interesting. Before we get further into the world of what it's like to code for a pacemaker, and then obviously when we'll go smaller and leadless and all that. Could you just talk a little bit about the history of the space for those that may be less aware? I mean, like many advanced technologies, sort of, people thought about this stuff like at the end of the 19th century, first pacemaker, sort of the end of the 1950s. I mean, was there even code to write for those initial pace? I mean, I know that they were the size of hockey pucks and other very large things at the time, but talk about sort of the mid 20th century and what the pacemaker industry used to be, and then we'll go further with tech.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, the concept that electricity does something to the body is, of course, very, very old, right? And there were all these advances that we make, kind of iterative advances, and also these big steps, right? Small steps and big steps throughout history. There's Dr. Zoll. Dr. Zoll figured out that you could actually keep a heart beating by throwing a whole bunch of electricity through the skin, with pads on the outside of the body. And that was a big advance that, prior to that, if your heart stopped, what were your odds, right? And so electrically, we can keep it running. There were plugged into the wall pacemakers that could be used by opening the chest and then having a wire onto the heart. There's this amazing story about cardiac surgery where Uh, you know, just a fun little aside here. We all know that you need that heart and lung machine during cardiac surgery to keep your heart beating, the one that keeps your heart oxygenated. And so you'd think that machine was invented in order to support cardiac surgery, but it turns out cardiac surgery was invented before that machine.
Yeah.
And some pioneering doctors did things like Walter Lillehei at the University of Minnesota. He took and said, well, one way we can pump blood is to use a different heart. And so they'd take mom or dad and have mom or dad's heart supporting the kid during open heart surgery. And so you'd have these amazing things happening. But then during that recovery phase, you needed to keep a pacemaker on the heart. And so these pacemakers were plugged into the wall. And the hospitals at that time, you think about the 1950s, there weren't a lot of machines keeping people alive. Yeah. And so you didn't necessarily have a situation where every room in the hospital had backup power, because that wasn't a natural thing. And so some of the, one of the worst case scenarios happened. There was a power outage, and the power outage caused this pacemaker plugged into a wall to fail. And then one of the children who went through this surgery, passed away because they didn't have cardiac support. So our founder, Earl Bakken, was an electrical engineer working in that lab. And, Dr. Lillehei said, I need a battery powered pacemaker. Now, you talk about futurism, and sometimes going backwards helps you understand the future. You think about these doctors, and what they probably meant was hook a car battery up to my pacemaker so it keeps running. But the time frame that's so interesting here is this is right around when the transistor was first being popularized, right? So, you have songs where you go down the old mine with the transistor radio, like that's the impact transistors have on society. And so I think it's important to remember, anytime you're talking about futurism, to watch for these time periods where a new baseline technology comes along. Just like the steam engine leads to the Industrial Revolution, just like a small engine leads to everything from cars to airplanes, the transistor led to so many amazing things. And one of them was the medical industry, the medical device industry. So Earl Bakken takes this transistor and he makes a handheld pacemaker. And now, the pacemaker has gone from this giant plugged into a wall to something truly portable. Necessity leads to invention, but invention leads to invention. The rapid growth in the pacemaker market right after that, where, hey, if it can be portable, can it be implantable? Now, instead of just for people who are recovering from surgery, this can help people who are up and walking around, or can help people get back up and walking around. And so that's sort of the genesis of the medical device industry, is this concept of let's put a transistor in. And so I think that it's really interesting to think about how these baseline technologies cause these clusters of invention. And then you look forward and you think about things like, lithium batteries, which then pacemakers took in, and how that can be a baseline technology. You look at miniaturization, and now you look at AI, and you think about how you're going to see this cluster of improvement every time these new baseline technologies come along, just like we saw during the Industrial Revolution, or during the time where we suddenly had airplanes or moon rockets.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's awesome. And continuing along that line of thought, and again, I didn't in the bio of the show, I neglected to mention you held several roles leading up to your current vice president role at R&D, from firmware engineer, principal systems engineer, and then I think it's in your bio around the time you're a chief systems engineer in the Bradycardia group, I guess, within pacemaking. And so bradycardia, for the audience, is when the heart slows down too much, and we don't like that to happen. And sort of that was, I guess, your initial focus. But again, when you look at sort of the broad portfolio of what exists today, and I'll let you go in direction with this, and then again, we'll get the Micra in a little bit. It's not just about, okay, here's a heart that's too slow. You do, cardiac resynchronization, where there's abnormal rhythms. There's implantable defibrillators when the heart stops entirely, and then all sorts of hybrid stuff related to putting in the atriums, the ventricles, dual chamber. Talk a little bit about your business R&D unit today, and sort of the scope of what's in that portfolio, and then we'll get to Micra.
Yeah, so following along, right? So the first pacemakers are just for people who have these surgical problems.
Right.
And then, that's a pretty sick patient. Like that's a really, really sick patient. But just like any drug, just like any other medical device, as you can make it better, as you can make it a lower side effect rate, you find more patients where, this is a good therapy for them. And so the history goes just like that. We start with something that's for really sick people. We make it smaller, we make it smarter, and now people who are a little less sick can get a benefit. We make it smaller, we make it smarter, we make it more physiologic. We add pacing the atrium. So you're not, the heart has 4 chambers. Originally, we were pacing one of them. Right now, you're pacing 2. That's almost twice as many people now who can get a benefit, because now you have people who have ventricular problems, you have people with atrial problems. Right? This constant improvement of making the device smarter, more physiologic, lower complications, just leads to more and more patients getting this benefit. You go from a therapy that's only about saving a life to a therapy that's about improving quality of life. And that's been the journey we've been on for 75 years. And, the pacemaker you get today is better than the pacemaker you would have gotten 15 years ago. And in so many ways. And I like to say we're halfway there, right? We're always halfway there, because our goal is to make the sick hearts act like healthy hearts. So what are the ways that the heart is sick? And what are the ways that technology can make that heart better, so that you get to return back to what our mission calls your full life? You have quality of life improvements, you have life-saving improvements. But in the end, if you have a problem with your heart that we think we can help, because the genesis of that problem is something electrical. And in other parts of Medtronic, we joke about the electricians and the plumbers, right? We have mechanical help, we have electrical help. I'm more in the electrical side. But if there's something wrong with your heart and we can help it, your whole quality of life should improve when your heart becomes less sick.
Absolutely. And we forget that cardiovascular disease is still the number one killer in the world. So it's very important to keep that in mind. But yeah, let's go to about now 10 years ago. This was sort of the genesis of what ultimately becomes Micra. And again, we're not at hockey pucks anymore. We're at things about the size of a large vitamin, a vitamin pill. And your team comes say, basically, look, we're going to make this product smaller. We're going to make it leadless. And then another aspect of it, this whole rate adapting pacing. And there's again, for everyone that wants to check it out, there's a really cool paper this is in Heart Rhythm in 2017 of February, rate adaptive pacing intracardiac pacemaker, which sort of goes into a lot of detail for anyone that wants to sort of delve into this. But ultimately, Wade, if you could sort of walk through a little bit of what it meant to take something that was the size of a hockey puck to create this vitamin pill size thing that not only all your engineers got to make them smaller, we got to get rid of these leads, but then you with your programming magic, okay, if the heart does this, it has to do that. If it does the other thing, we have to do that. And talk about what it means now to code for something that's a lot smaller and doesn't have all the other stuff that it had 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the background, of course, pacemakers had been getting iteratively smaller over time, right? And so you have been making the batteries last longer. You've been making it smarter. You've been making it smaller. But fundamentally, the total architecture hadn't changed in a long, long time, which is the device is implanted, usually up in the chest, and then a wire called a lead runs down into the heart. And the electricity goes down the wire, and then the heart's electricity comes back up the wire, so the device knows what's going on. And we'd make the device smaller, we'd make the leads better. These leads have an amazing job, right? You take a paper clip and you bend it 7 times, it's going to break. Your heart beats 100,000 times a day. So the lead has to bend 400 million times in 10 years. It's amazing, right? And it's in an active immune system that's trying to kill it. Like, it's just an amazing accomplishment. I mean, I think about how hard that is. I mean, that's up there in difficulty with the space program for how difficult of an environment you're working in when you're working with the heart. But at some point, leads do amazing jobs. The pacemaker does an amazing job. But the next big step is always to make the surgery less invasive. And fundamentally, when you're putting a device in the chest, you have to make an incision that's big enough for the device and the leads. And if you can make a device so small that it can fit through a vein, then it's more of a little poke than it is a big cut. And the device can go all the way into the heart. You no longer have any way for infection to find a way from the skin down into the heart, because that skin to heart pathway is gone. You don't have the lead going through the ribs, so you end up with fewer restrictions on the patient. There's patients who get nervous doing something like playing golf. Are they going to pull their lead out? This is a very, very, very rare occurrence once the lead's settled in, but it still makes people nervous sometimes. And of course, I'm not a doctor. You need to talk to doctors, but we've had patients with Micra who have said things like, I just don't have any restrictions. I forget I even have the pacemaker. And from an engineering standpoint, if you're designing something flashy like a sports car, you never want someone to forget they're in a sports car. But if you're designing a medical device, the highest compliment you can get is, I forget that I'm sick, right? That is the gold standard for compliment. And so, with something like Micra, that was really what it was about. Can we lower those side effects? Can we lower the risks that come with the surgery? Can we lower the impact on the patient's life that they perceive that they're sick? And so that was the real goal of the product. And during that time, I was a junior system engineer, and what a great learning experience to have the whole system architecture rebuilt on the project I was working on. You talked about code. Imagine that you've got this team that's built this incredibly low power microprocessor and this incredibly high density battery. The pressure on the computer coder to not just suck all the power out of it with inefficient code. How do you write code that sips instead of gulps, right? How do you make circuits that sip instead of gulp? The whole team had to view their job as, we're making this thing really small and it has to last 10 years. How can everybody make it last 10 years? Big team effort. And it was really a lot of fun to work with, such passionate people and making these decisions like, well, you have to do this and you do this, and then together we'll reach the goal. Just a great experience. And then to have this goal that we had at the start of the project of cutting the complications, the side effects in half. And now 10 years in, publication after publication after publication has shown that we did achieve that goal. We really did cut the complications in half in a 60-year-old at the time technology, now 70-year-old technology. You think about maturity curves. And when do you make that kind of giant improvement on a mature technology? Well, it's by making these big disruptive moves that you can do that.
And clearly, and it's I think I read that over 300,000 patients have now used it. So it's just, again, you're impacting lives, and improving quality of life, and it's an awesome story by itself, and that right. But then obviously, because you're constantly on the forefront of what's happening next. You made it smaller, leadless, rate adaptive, and all that. But then I also noticed, again, some in recent years, there was an American Journal of Cardiology paper. This was September 2023. This had to do with the synchronization for left bundle branch area pacing. And so the way I look at it, okay, we got the heart, everything now you got specific areas in the heart. And now where it seems you're going, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you not only can go to a specific area of the heart, but a specific branch. And the heart is very electrical, as you were saying. It's very specific areas. What is the, talk a little bit about where you see a lot of this going? Because clearly, as you get, I guess, further down these branches, you're going to have to potentially get smaller, get a lot more specific with the coding again, about, okay, the electrical's here, not here, and all that. Where is the innovation going? What are the next stages here of what's happening in pacemakers?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of this comes back to that part about trying to make a sick heart as healthy as possible.
Right.
And, biomedical engineers especially don't pretend that they're smarter than nature, And so how does a healthy heart work? How does it really work? And the more you can find out about how a healthy heart works, the more you can think about what you got to do to make things different. And so, you mentioned rate adaptive and you mentioned left bundle. I'll try to cover them both here. So a healthy heart, when you exercise, speeds up, right? Your heart rate goes faster when you're exercising. So how do you make a pacemaker know you're exercising? It's a box, right? It's a computer. What sensors can make a heart know that you're exercising? One of the easiest ones is there an accelerometer that bounces? When I get up and walk, I bounce, right? And so the bouncing makes the accelerometer know you're exercising. So that's a really good cue that you should probably speed the heart rate up. We've had accelerometers in pacemakers for a long time. One of the challenges with Micra is now the pacemaker's inside a beating heart. So like the heart's always moving, even when you're not exercising. So we did a lot of work to make sure that the pacemaker could notice you were exercising, even though the heart was constantly moving. So how do you deal with that change to where the device has been placed? So that's, again, trying to make that sick heart act more healthy. And then the left bundle branch stuff is super interesting. The heart has a natural electrical sort of superhighway in it that you need to make that heart really an efficient pump. You have to have all the muscles moving at once. Mm-hmm. And so just like your arm has nerves, that send electricity so your arm can contract and lift something up, your heart has that same sort of network in it to try to make the heart beat as efficiently and powerfully as possible. And traditional pacemakers haven't been able to tap into that. They've been able to make the heart beat, but not in the way that nature makes the heart beat. Okay. So what we've been really looking at recently is how do you find places in the heart that can tap into that natural way of making a heart beat? So the heartbeat, again, is a little more physiologic, a little more natural. Patients get a little more benefit because it's more of the way that your heart is when it's natural. But you're exactly right. Now, to do that, you're going from generalized medicine to personalized medicine. You're going from generalized locations to specific locations. You're going from in the chamber to in a very specific spot in the chamber. And the physicians, they have the visualization that they have. It's an X-ray, right? How do you find a specific spot in a two-dimensional X-ray? How do we give them the tools? Because, as much as anything, you can't make things take 3 times as long. The hospitals don't have the ability. They don't have the beds. They don't have the people. They can't have things take longer. So we're asking them to go to more specific places and do more specific things. Mm-hmm. And then the challenge comes back on us to have it done in a way where it doesn't, blow up the medical system. And so that's exactly where technology has to play such a big role. And smaller, smarter, more precise, easier to guide, easier to find the location, easier to know that you're in the right location. These are all the things we got to do in order to get that goal of more physiologic, sick heart acts healthy.
Mm-hmm. One of the awesome guests I had from Medtronic last year was the Dr. Ha Hong, who is with the colonoscopy group. And, he was introducing sort of the stuff that you're doing over there with artificial intelligence and reading colonoscopies and all that. You mentioned AI before, and obviously everyone's sort of using AI nowadays in some manner in medtech and biotech and so forth. How does AI fit into this? Obviously, it's when it comes to these electrical patterns and knowing what's going on in every second, it seems like it probably has an important role in these devices to improve that function in that way. And at the same time, again, and I tried to sort of dive into some of these papers and understand exactly what you're talking about. But when it came to sort of the issues you were talking about before, about, you don't want things falling out, you don't want things fracturing in certain ways. We talk a lot about digital twins and some of these other tools that allow you to model these stuff before you actually, have to put them in somebody. What are the roles of some of these tools and ultimately how you develop, how you innovate this next generation of products?
Oh, that's, it'd be crazy not to use those sort of tools, right? Like what, how could you not? And we've had some pretty big successes. I would say, sometimes we don't think about the fact that we might have been on the train a little earlier, in medical device, there's always this trade-off between nobody wants something that feels not complete, right? But you also don't want to wait decades to get the benefits of science. And so, absolutely, these digital twin things have been incredibly helpful. Over 10 years ago, one of the things that we had been watching is that if you go to get an MRI, there's this big sign that says no pacemaker, right? No pacemaker.
Yep.
And MRI is becoming the standard of care. And now our patients can't get the standard of care. Why? Why is that true? What is it about the pacemaker that made us say that we couldn't put in an MRI? And so we did a tremendous amount of work. And you couldn't just like put 1 million patients in MRIs and see what happens. That would have been crazy. So we built up a massive computer modeling effort that nowadays we would have called digital twin. Back then we just called it computer modeling. To prove what would happen. We had to build an in-computer model of what's going on in an MRI, an in-computer model of what's going on in a pacemaker, an in-computer model of what's going on in hearts. And we got to the point where we said, no, under the right conditions, pacemaker patients can get MRIs. And so now this wonderful methodology of MRI is available to our patients, where if we hadn't done that work, it wouldn't have been available. So we've seen the direct benefit of using technologies like digital twin. And then once you built that capability, you've already taken the first big step. You have the supercomputer, you have the models. Now, what else can you do with it? And with AI, same sort of place. We always have the challenge of that little tiny battery, that little tiny computer. Can we run a full neural network on a little tiny pacemaker? Maybe not yet today, but that doesn't mean you can't get a benefit. You can do all sorts of things outside of the pacemaker. You can do all sorts of things to learn about clustering of different types of patients. You can do all sorts of things to be ready for the day when you can run it inside the pacemaker. But before it's inside the pacemaker, it can be on the learning side. It can be on the research side. It can be on the patient treatment side. We do have a device. We have a monitor called Link. And the Link monitor doesn't have any wires. It's sort of like a long-term heart monitor you actually implant, and the implanted Link monitor watches to see if its original goal was to detect these sort of hard to find things. Some patients may have gotten a Holter or a patch. If you don't find anything on the Holter, you don't find anything on the patch, a lot of times it's because it can only look for a week, whereas Link can look for years. And the challenge with Link is, you're trying to watch for, could this be the wrong thing? Could this be the wrong thing? Could this be the wrong thing? And so you don't want to miss anything. Well, that's a great place for AI. So a couple of years ago, we launched an external review AI. So the data from Link goes up to a cloud. The cloud reviews the data with AI. The doctor sees the things that matter. And so we absolutely have room for AI already. We've already launched it. And those technologies, digital twin and AI, they're just going to make it so much easier to do that personalized medicine, to make your heart act the way your heart used to.
Awesome. Really awesome. Wait, one other place I wanted to go, and we've had a few guests on from the space medicine domain the last couple of years, and they're always talking about how the number one issue, atrophy of the heart muscle, arrhythmias, structural remodeling that occurs when you're in zero gravity or low gravity. We're not sending a lot of people up right now, but Mr. Musk and everybody else predicts we're going to be having a lot of people up there soon. I know you sent a Micra up several years ago, talking about being ahead of the curve and check out what was going on with vibrations and low gravity and low temperatures and all that. Can you say a couple words about what you learned? And again, just, we could talk a little bit about futurism and where you see potentially, because, I know that the folks that we've talked to, sending up, stem cells and doing tissue engineering and all that, but seems like Micra might have an interesting role, let's say, in the future of this frontier as well.
Oh, yeah. So this is a great story. There's this organization. It's a nonprofit organization that runs a program called Cubes in Space. And what they did is, so let's say you were a university and you wanted to get stuff up on the space station. They don't just let you do that. Right. So NASA has this whole multi-step program where you have to prove that you're capable. And one of the first steps is they use this small suborbital rocket called a sounding rocket. And it's basically a tube. And these universities or whoever else makes these little discs and they put them in this tube and they send them up into space to see how they're working.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this group, the Cubes in Space group, realized that, this is a former NASA employee, that the nose cone was empty. So she says, hey, what if I could let students put things in the nose cone? And so this is this program, Cubes in Space, that they opened up for high school kids. And, you'd think that, this sounds crazy. It's a technical writing competition in the end. Whoever gets excited about technical writing, just add rockets. Now people are excited. And so these kids have to put almost this grant proposal. Like, this is what I want to do with my cube. And this cube is like an inch by an inch by an inch. It's tiny. And kids come up with all these amazingly clever, creative things. It's amazing what kids can do when you let them, right? And one kid, she had a classmate who had a diabetic pump, and she was asking that same question, like, would he ever be able to go into space? But nothing she could find that was a medical device, an active medical device, would fit in that cube except Micra. So she calls us and says, hey, would you be willing to send a Micra to space? And boy, if you want to get engineers, like, this is like flypaper for engineers, right? Like, oh my gosh, I get to send something I worked on into space. And so we worked with her, and she ended up winning one of the spots in the competition. We sent the Micra into space, and you have to design these incredibly robust systems. You just do. You don't know what a patient's going to do. There's a story where we had a patient with heart disease who went heli-skiing, as in took a helicopter to the top of a mountain and jumped out of the helicopter and skied down the mountain. So again, the mission of full life, right? But how robust do you have to make your things when you've got scuba divers and heli-skiers? And so what is one of the biggest tests you can put something through? A rocket launch is a pretty big test. And, we do put our things through all these tests that simulate the craziest conditions we can think of. And the fact that somebody asked us to put a Micra into a rocket and we were able to send it in space, and it lived through all those accelerations of a rocket launch, it lived through all the decelerations of coming back down, and we put the little radio head over it, and it was still working. It's a big deal, right? Because maybe we're not going to have a lot of pacemakers in astronauts, but if you know that a pacemaker can survive a rocket launch, hopefully that gives you a little confidence that it can survive a drive to the mall.
There you go. No, that's an awesome story, and the part that it was like a 15-year-old kid that thought about it, and I love how when I hear that the next generation being inspired by what you do, it just adds another layer to the excitement, and we're in this era where we need to excite the next generation with STEM because it is the future. So bravo for that. Wait, what else is coming up that we should know about? Clearly, you're getting smaller, and I don't know if we're going from micro to nano, whatever's on the nano front gets the size of a piece of rice or something. But what else is happening we should know about that you can talk about that's not confidential? Yeah. And then other public-facing initiatives that we should know about, whether it's conferences, talks that you may be giving, any place we could potentially meet you and run into you, anything else that I have while we have you today. Please wait.
Look, if you want to know what we're going to do next, it's what has always worked. Make it more physiologic, make the patient experience better, right? Make it less intrusive to the patient, lower the side effects. Those are your two magic things that we're always going to try to do. And that's across Medtronic. Within pacemakers specifically, it's that sick heart being healthy. Like I said, halfway there. And then once you've done that, once we're confident that we have made the device better, now what patients who didn't used to be able to benefit can suddenly benefit? Earlier in the talk, you brought up cardiac resynchronization therapy. I'll use this as a backward example, and then I'll give you a forward example. Old pacemakers, a long time ago, like I said, they didn't use that ability to take the fast network, the superhighway, the electrical conduction system of the heart. And so they would actually cause the heart to desynchronize slightly. And for most patients, that didn't lead to any challenges. But there was a certain group of patients with a certain type of heart failure where that actually would make them worse. And so there's this group that needed their heart resynchronized, not desynchronized. And so, we invented a way to get that heart back into synchronization. And it involved getting a lead to the outside of the left side of the heart and another lead to the inside of the right side of the heart. So you can time the paces so that the heart goes back and is resynchronized. And that made the heart more physiologic, right? It's more physiologic to have a resynchronized heart than a desynchronized heart.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, it wasn't just that people who happened to have this condition and also needed a pacemaker could get a pacemaker. It was people with this condition, that's all they needed. If they had that condition, they could get a pacemaker. And so it opened up a whole new group of people that could get a benefit from a medical device, whereas there was no real treatment for those people before that invention. So we're always looking at that. What's the population out there that doesn't have a good therapy? Maybe the drugs don't do much. Maybe there's no medical device out there, or maybe the options they have way too high of side effects for it to be viable for the condition they have. So just super, super exciting news. Couldn't have shared this with you if this was a week ago, but we just had a press release for a brand new clinical study that we're doing that is in investigation. It's a clinical study. We don't know the results. One of the hallmarks of medicine is you need to be at a point of balance before you do a clinical study, right? But this clinical study is for a whole new group of patients with a specific different type of heart failure, where we're hoping that using a pacemaker in a physiologic way will help those patients. Again, we have to take these opportunities to try, right? There's groups of patients who just don't have good therapies. And will it work? I mean, this is why you run the trial to find out. So an investigative approach, we need to make sure we run the clinical trial and do the right science to find out for sure. And I mean, we always have to make sure we thank all these volunteers who are willing to be in a clinical study like this, because medicine can't move forward without it. But this is a super exciting thing, right? We're taking the opportunity to try to go help sick patients now that our technology is at the point that we think there's a good chance it can help them.
It's amazing work. It's an amazing story from where you started off and what you're doing now. And I wish you and the team the best with it, Aid, as you continue to move these innovations forward. Really a great story. Again, for everyone out there that's going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks, or who will be watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been spending time with Wade Demmer, Vice President, Research and Development at Medtronic, doing really amazing things to develop these cutting-edge pacemaking solutions to transform healthcare delivery and ultimately improve patient lives. Wade, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out to walk us through your story, everything you've been up to. Thank you for everything you do for patients. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us via the type of work you do. Really, really an awesome story.
Oh, I really appreciate it. And the point about mentoring the next generation, anyone from a future generations considering STEM, just remember the saying that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And that's what you do in STEM, is you try to go make the future and you try to make it better. So thanks everyone for listening. It was a great experience. And thank you so much, Ira.
Awesome having you. Really great having you.